She stood in the lobby holding wildflowers, and for reasons I couldn't explain, my chest tightened. The morning began like any other in my life. Structured, polished, efficient. My calendar was stacked with meetings. My assistant already trailed 2 steps behind me, tablet in hand, reading off numbers and names like a rhythmic mantra of control. The glass walls of Hayes Industries shimmered with the pale light of a spring morning, and every reflection reminded me of who I was. Isabel Hayes, CEO, 42 years old, the woman who never missed a step, never lost her composure, never had time for the sentimental or the small. At least, that's what I told myself every day before the world decided to humble me. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and ambition, a blend of expensive perfume and freshly printed contracts. The soft hum of polite voices filled the air, secretaries exchanging notes, security guards greeting employees, elevators chiming with mechanical precision. Everything in my building functioned like a clock, predictable, dependable, flawless, until she appeared. She couldn't have been more than 7, standing near the front desk with a bouquet of wildflowers clutched tightly in both hands. Her shoes were scuffed, her dress a little too big, her hair pulled back with mismatched ribbons. She didn't belong there, not among tailored suits and polished marble floors. Yet there she was, small and still, as if the entire building had paused to take her in. The receptionist bent down, confused, whispering something I couldn't hear. I was already halfway toward the elevators when the girl looked up. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I stopped walking. Her eyes caught me first, wide, brown, unflinchingly direct. Not afraid, not shy, just searching, as though she recognized me from a dream I didn't remember having. The wildflowers trembled slightly in her grip, stems damp and uneven, clearly picked from somewhere real. A roadside, a park, not a florist's shop. "Ms. Hayes?" my assistant whispered, noticing my sudden hesitation. "Who is she?" I asked. The receptionist looked relieved to see me, gesturing the girl forward. "She's looking for her mother, ma'am. Says she works here. A Ms. Alvarez." The name brushed something faint in my memory, like a soft draft through a sealed room. Maria Alvarez. I'd seen it before, in employee rosters, maintenance reports, automated signatures at the bottom of cleaning schedules. I'd never attached a face to it. Why would I? In a company of 600, janitors were ghosts, efficient and invisible. I stepped closer, crouching just enough to meet the girl's eyes. "What's your name?" "Leah," she said softly. Her voice was light but clear. "I brought these for my mom." The flowers, a mess of daisies, dandelions, and small purple blooms, trembled again as she adjusted her grip. Her nails were short and dirty, like she'd dug them out of the earth herself. "That's very sweet," I managed, though the words felt foreign in my mouth. "Is your mom working today?" Leah looked down at her shoes. She was supposed to. Something in her tone, quiet certainty mixed with confusion, made my chest tighten. My assistant shifted behind me, impatient. "Ma'am, you have a call with the investors in 5 minutes." "Cancel it," I said automatically, without breaking eye contact with the girl. The receptionist blinked. My assistant froze. I had never canceled a call in 10 years. But there was something about Leah, something fragile and familiar, that made time feel irrelevant. I asked the front desk to check the roster. Maria Alvarez hadn't clocked in for 2 weeks. No one had filed a report. No one had even noticed. In a company that monitored every breath of data, we hadn't realized one of our own had simply disappeared. "Do you know where your mother is, sweetheart?" I asked gently. Leah shook her head. "She said she was tired. She said not to worry." Her words hit harder than I expected. The kind of tired she meant, I knew that tired. The kind that lived in your bones, the kind that made every sunrise heavier. I knelt fully now, ignoring the stares from employees passing by. "Where do you live, Leah?" "On Rosewood Street," she said quickly. "Apartment 4. She said it like she was used to answering grown-up questions, used to people not listening twice. Mom said if I ever got lost, I should come here. She said this building is where she belongs. Her innocence tore something open inside me. Maria Alvarez had believed this place, my place, was safe, worthy of being her daughter's refuge. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but the words tangled. All I could manage was, "Has anyone been with you today?" She shook her head again. A silence stretched, uncomfortable and long. My assistant shifted beside me, whispering that we could call social services, maybe HR, maybe security. I hated how quickly everyone turned problems into paperwork. I stood slowly, smoothing my suit. "Come with me, Leah," I said quietly. "Let's find out where your mom is." We walked through the marble lobby together, her small hand clutching mine. The contrast wasn't lost on me, her tiny fingers smudged with soil against my manicured nails, her little shoes squeaking softly on the polished floor. Every step echoed louder than it should have, as though the building itself was listening. We reached the staff corridor, the one that led to maintenance offices and janitorial storage. Few executives ever walked there. The scent of cleaning supplies filled the narrow hallway. It was strange how familiar it felt. Sterile, chemical, human in its own way. I glanced at the bulletin board. Maria's name still listed under the night shift schedule. The date hadn't been updated in weeks. Leah stopped suddenly, beside a closet door. "That's her locker," she said. The metal locker was plain, dented, number 17 scrawled on the front. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I even had the right. But the girl's hopeful expression made the decision for me. Inside were folded overalls, a half-empty thermos, and a single photo taped to the back wall, Maria smiling, holding a baby I now knew was Leah. I stared at that smile. It was gentle, honest, the kind that asked for nothing but offered everything. I swallowed hard. She worked hard, didn't she? Leah nodded proudly. She said her hands made things clean so other people could dream. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That simple truth, that quiet pride, felt like a mirror I didn't want to face. A maintenance supervisor walked by, startled to see me there. "Ms. Hayes, I didn't expect—" "Where's Maria Alvarez?" I interrupted. He hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. She stopped coming in 2 weeks ago. Didn't answer calls. I thought HR knew." They didn't. None of us did. Leah's small voice broke the silence. "Can we go see her now?" I looked down at her, my heart tightening. "We'll find her, I promise." I called for my driver and asked him to bring the car around. I didn't know where we were going yet, only that I couldn't send her away. As we waited, Leah climbed onto one of the leather lobby chairs, arranging her flowers carefully on her lap. "Why those flowers?" I asked softly. "Mom likes the ones that don't need much to live," she said. "She says they grow anywhere, even where people forget to look." I turned away so she wouldn't see the tears pressing at the corners of my eyes. When the car arrived, she followed me quietly, still clutching her bouquet. Through the tinted window, I saw her reflection. Her eyes filled not with fear, but a strange calmness that didn't belong to a child. Something about her presence made me feel small again, unguarded, almost human. I didn't know what waited for us at the end of that drive. Answers, regrets, maybe both. But I knew this. My life had just shifted, quietly, irrevocably, because of a little girl holding wildflowers in my lobby. I didn't know it then, but that little girl's flowers were for a grave I should have visited years ago. The smell of cleaning chemicals still reminded me of her, even after all these years. The next morning, the building felt heavier, quieter, as if it somehow knew what I had learned, or rather, what I hadn't. Maria Alvarez's name still lingered in my mind, like a ghost that refused to fade. The scent of lemon disinfectant hung faintly in the air, the same scent that had filled my office for years after late nights and long meetings. I'd always associated it with cleanliness, order, efficiency. But now it just reminded me of her. I stood by the coffee machine in the executive lounge, staring blankly at the reflection in the polished steel. Behind my image, the skyline shimmered in the morning light, and I couldn't help but think of that little girl, Leah, her wildflowers trembling in her hands. I hadn't been able to get her face out of my mind. I sipped my coffee, though it tasted wrong, bitter in a way that had nothing to do with beans or temperature. Maria's name came back again. I remembered her faintly. Short, quiet, always with her hair pulled into a low bun, her uniform crisp despite the work she did. She used to greet me when I passed through the hallways late at night, her voice soft but warm. "Good evening, Ms. Hayes," she would say, like she genuinely meant it. I never said more than, "Thank you." But there was one night, one moment I'd never forgotten, though I buried it under layers of self-importance and excuses. It was 7 years ago. The board meeting had gone badly, investors had threatened to pull funding, and one of them had called me a woman too emotional for leadership. I'd held myself together until everyone left, then sat alone in that empty boardroom, the city lights below me turning into blurs through my tears. I thought no one saw me, except Maria. She'd come in quietly to clean the table, humming under her breath. When she saw me sitting there, she froze. I remember snapping, embarrassed, wiping my face and saying something like, "I'll be out in a minute." But she didn't leave. Instead, she said softly, "Sometimes even strong people need to stop pretending." I'd looked up at her then, startled. No one had ever said that to me before. Not my colleagues, not my so-called friends, not even my family. Her eyes were kind but sad, like she'd known that kind of loneliness her whole life. I didn't answer her, just nodded, and she smiled, the small, understanding kind that makes silence feel less heavy. Then she started cleaning again, quietly, respectfully, as if she hadn't just seen the CEO fall apart in her own boardroom. That was Maria. She had a way of existing without intruding, of seeing without judging. And I had treated her like background noise. I walked through the building that morning seeing her everywhere, her reflection in the freshly polished floors, her shadow in the empty corridors. The janitorial closet was closed now, the small sign on the door crooked. Someone else was using her cart. It felt wrong. At lunch, I passed by the break room where most of the staff, not executives, but assistants, maintenance, reception, gathered to eat. Normally, I avoided this part of the floor. It made people nervous when I showed up unannounced. But that day, I stopped. The smell hit me first. Coffee, reheated leftovers, cleaning solution, and something faintly metallic from the old fridge. The chatter died the second I stepped in. A few employees nodded politely. Others avoided my eyes. I smiled, the kind of corporate smile that says, "I'm approachable, but still in charge." "Don't let me interrupt," I said, pouring myself water I didn't need. "Just passing through." No one believed me, of course. I could feel their unease. But then I noticed something, a small, faded photo taped to the vending machine. Maria, standing with a mop, smiling. Someone had written, "We miss you," M underneath it in marker. A young woman sitting near the counter caught me looking. She shifted nervously, then said, "She was nice, always brought cookies for everyone on Fridays, even when she was sick." I turned. "Sick?" The woman nodded. "She didn't talk about it much. But some nights she'd sit down because she got dizzy, said she was fine. We told her to take time off, but she said she couldn't afford to." Something twisted inside me. How had I not known? How had no one told me? I asked quietly. "Did anyone from management check on her?" A silence stretched across the room. Someone muttered, "HR said it wasn't their concern once she stopped showing up." Not their concern. The words burned. Before I could respond, the door opened, and there she was again. Leah, standing in the doorway, clutching the same bouquet of wildflowers, though they'd wilted slightly now. Her backpack looked heavier, her eyes tired. Everyone froze. "Hi," she said softly. "I came to see if my mom's back yet." I set my glass down. "Leah." Her face lit up when she saw me. "You remember?" "Of course I do." I knelt again so we were eye level. "We talked yesterday, remember? You told me your mom likes the flowers that don't need much to live." She nodded solemnly. "She always said flowers don't complain when the rain hurts them. They just keep growing." There was something heartbreaking in the way she said it, as if she understood pain better than most adults I knew. I asked gently, "Who brought you here today?" "My neighbor," she said, "but she had to go to work." "Does your mom still live on Rosewood Street?" "Yes," she said, "but I haven't seen her in days." The room was silent again. I could feel the eyes of every employee on me, waiting to see what the CEO would do. I stood slowly. "Come with me, Leah," I said softly. "Let's go upstairs for a bit." We took the elevator to my office. I poured her some juice, found her crackers from the hospitality tray, and sat across from her. My office, usually cold, modern, full of glass and steel, suddenly felt too big, too impersonal. Leah's small presence made everything else feel like pretense. "Do you have anyone else?" I asked. She shook her head. "Just me and Mom." "What about your father?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Mom said he wasn't around much. Said some people love you in silence, but that doesn't mean they're not there." I swallowed hard. "Do you believe that?" She shrugged. "Sometimes silence feels louder than love." I didn't know what to say. I called HR. When they picked up, my voice came out sharper than I intended. "Maria Alvarez, custodial staff. I want her employee records, last known address, emergency contact, everything." The pause on the other end was long. Too long. Finally, a cautious voice said, "Ms. Hayes, that file might take some time to retrieve. She didn't have much documentation when she was hired. We'll have to check manually." "Manually?" I repeated, anger creeping into my tone. "You've automated everything from payroll to coffee orders, but you can't find one woman's file?" I'll check, ma'am," the voice stammered. "Do that," I said, then hung up. Leah looked up at me, eyes wide. "Are they mad?" "No," I said, forcing calm. "They're just slow." She tilted her head. "Mom said sometimes when people take too long to answer, it's because they're hiding something." Her words lingered long after she left my office that day. Hours later, HR finally sent me a message. "We're reviewing the records. There might be a delay, always a delay." I walked through the office floors that evening after most employees had gone home. The hallways glowed dimly under the soft hum of fluorescent light. The cleaners were gone. The silence was thick. Every mop, every bucket, every faint scent of polish, it all whispered her name. Maria. I found myself standing outside the janitor's locker room again, staring at locker number 17. The photo was gone. Someone had taken it down. For a moment I thought I saw movement in the reflection of the glass door, a shadow, familiar and fleeting. I turned, but there was no one there. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Or maybe some ghosts don't need bodies to linger. When I returned to my office, the city lights below looked different. Colder. Smaller. For the first time in years, the glass walls felt like a cage. I picked up the phone again and called HR one last time. "I want Maria Alvarez's address," I said, my voice steady but low. "Now." There was silence. Then a hesitant voice replied, "Ms. Hayes, are you sure you want to see it?" When I asked HR for her address, they hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. The apartment smelled of bleach, wilted lilies, and something heartbreakingly final. The address HR finally sent me looked like a mistake. Rosewood Street wasn't the kind of place you'd expect anyone from Hayes Industries to live, not even the janitors. The buildings there were small and weary, their bricks stained by time and rain, their windows barred not for decoration, but for defense. I sat in the back of the car, watching the city's shine give way to its forgotten edges. The glass towers shrank behind me, swallowed by rows of narrow streets and flickering streetlights that hummed like old secrets. When we stopped, I almost didn't get out. The building in front of me leaned slightly to one side, the paint peeling in long, tired strips. The number on the door was barely visible beneath layers of rust and dust. This was where Maria Alvarez had lived, while she spent her nights scrubbing my company's marble floors. I'd passed her hundreds of times, smiling politely, never once asking where she went when her shift ended. Now I knew. The hallway smelled faintly of dampness and something sharper. Bleach, maybe. Someone had tried to clean too much, to scrub away something that wouldn't leave. A neighbor's radio played faintly through a thin wall, an old love song crackling with static. I climbed the stairs slowly, the weight of my own guilt pressing heavier with every step. Apartment 4. The number was written in marker over a broken plate of glass. I knocked once. No answer. I tried again, louder. Still nothing. Finally, an elderly woman across the hall cracked her door open. Her gray hair was pinned loosely, her eyes sharp with curiosity and suspicion. "You looking for Maria?" she asked. "Yes," I said quickly, pulling out a business card as if that could explain anything. I know who you are," she interrupted. "She talked about you sometimes, said you worked where she cleaned." Her tone wasn't unkind, but it wasn't forgiving either. "I need to find her," I said. "It's urgent." The woman sighed, the sound heavy with something like pity. "You're too late, dear." My chest tightened. "Too late?" "She passed last week," the woman said softly. "Didn't anyone tell you?" I didn't answer. My mouth opened, but no sound came. "She got sick," the woman continued, shaking her head. "Cancer. Stage 4, I think. She worked right up until she couldn't stand anymore. Wouldn't let anyone help. Said she had a daughter to take care of." Her words echoed in my head. She had a daughter to take care of. I turned back to the door, numb. Is her daughter here?" The woman frowned. "Little Leah? She's been staying with me since the hospital took her mother. I just brought her home this morning." I hesitated, then reached for the doorknob. It turned easily. The door wasn't locked. The apartment was small, one room pretending to be 3. The couch sagged under the weight of age, the curtains hung limp and uneven, and the floor was scattered with unopened mail. On the small kitchen table, a vase of wilted lilies leaned sideways, petals browned at the edges. The air smelled of cleaning chemicals, as if Maria had tried to tidy the place before leaving, as if she couldn't bear to let the world see her home undone. There were eviction notices on the counter, some unopened envelopes from the hospital, and a half-empty bottle of pain medication lying beside a cup of water. The fridge hummed softly, but when I opened it, it was nearly empty. Just a carton of milk, a few apples, and a note taped to the inside. For Leah. I walked deeper into the apartment, my heels clicking too loudly on the linoleum floor. It felt wrong to make noise in a place that had gone so still. On the wall above a narrow bed hung a child's drawing, a hospital room, done in crayon. A woman lay on the bed, smiling weakly. Beside her stood a little girl holding flowers. Over them, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Me and Mama getting better." I stared at that drawing until my throat ached. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I turned, and there she was, Leah, standing in the doorway, clutching her school bag like it was armor. Her eyes were red but dry, her face far too calm for a child who had lost everything. "Leah," I whispered. She nodded slowly. "You came?" My chest tightened again. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I didn't know—" "She didn't tell anyone," Leah interrupted quietly. "She said people only care when it's too late." The truth in her words hit harder than any accusation could have. I knelt, gently taking her free hand. She was brave, wasn't she? Leah nodded. She said she didn't want anyone to see her when she stopped being strong. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, she stopped trying to be brave. She dropped the bag and pressed her face against my shoulder, her small body shaking. I held her without thinking, my hand resting on her hair, the scent of dust and lavender soap filling the space between us. "I should have been there," I whispered, though the apology was for more than her mother's death. It was for every time I'd walked past Maria without seeing her, every thank you I hadn't meant, every blind assumption that kindness was something owed to me because of a title. When Leah finally pulled back, she wiped her face and said softly, "She told me you were important." I frowned. "She said that?" "Yes," Leah said. "She said you'd understand someday." I didn't know what that meant then, but her tone made me uneasy. I stood and glanced around again, my eyes catching on a small stack of letters on the nightstand, all addressed to Ms. Isabel Hayes. None opened. My hands trembled as I picked up the top one. The handwriting was delicate, looping, the kind of penmanship that belonged to someone raised to care about words. I wanted to open it right then, but something in me hesitated. I wasn't ready for what it might say. "Did your mother ever talk about family?" I asked quietly. Leah shook her head. "Just me. She said everyone else stopped calling after she got sick." I wanted to scream, at the system, at the company, at myself. The thought that she had spent her final months alone while I was sitting in glass offices arguing over quarterly profits made me sick. I turned to the neighbor, who had followed us in. "Why didn't anyone tell the company?" The woman's voice softened. "She didn't want pity. Said she'd worked too hard to be anyone's charity case." I nodded slowly. "That sounds like her." Leah walked to the small table and touched the wilted flowers gently, rearranging them with the care of someone who still believed they might come back to life. "She wanted to be buried where the sun hits the grass," she said quietly. "Not in the city." I crouched beside her again. "We'll make sure of that," I said. "I promise." For a moment she looked at me. Really looked. And I saw something shift in her expression. Not forgiveness yet, but trust beginning to form. When I left the apartment, the hallway felt colder. The smell of bleach lingered, sharp and lonely. The city outside buzzed with life, oblivious to what had happened behind that thin wooden door. I paused before leaving, glancing back one last time. The drawing on the wall caught the light, and for a second, it almost looked alive. Two figures surrounded by color, by hope. That night, as I sat in my car outside the building, Leah asleep beside me, I opened one of the letters. The first line made my breath stop. "If you're reading this, Isabel, then I've kept my promise, and it's time you knew the truth. That night, Leah told me her mother had a secret, and that I was part of it. Sometimes the dead keep your secrets better than the living ever could. Grief has a strange way of rearranging time. Some memories, long buried, start clawing their way back up as if summoned by guilt. After the funeral, after the condolences and the flowers that smelled too much like endings, I sat in my office, staring at the letter Maria had written to me, the one I still couldn't finish reading. Her handwriting haunted me, looping and careful, like every word had been chosen not to hurt more than it needed to. It was late, the kind of late where the city outside turns into a blur of lights and ghosts, when Leah appeared at my door again. She shouldn't have been there. The security guard must have let her up, probably recognizing the little girl who had somehow become part of my days. She stood there clutching something in both hands. Not flowers this time, but a worn photograph, edges yellowed and curling. "Leah," I said softly, setting the letter down. "It's past your bedtime." She didn't move. "I need to show you something." Her tone was too steady for her age, her expression too serious. She crossed the room, climbed up on the leather chair opposite my desk, and slid the photograph across the polished wood. "Mom told me to give you this if anything ever happened to her." I hesitated before picking it up. The picture was old, faded from sun exposure, creased down the middle. In it, a young woman stood in a garden, smiling. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her dark hair was tied back, her eyes bright, her smile open and soft. Beside her stood a little girl, maybe 6 years old, in a frilly white dress, holding a lopsided ice cream cone. The girl's face was half turned toward the woman, laughing. It took me only a second to realize who they were. Maria and me. My heart dropped. The photo slipped slightly in my hand, as if it wanted to escape before I could finish remembering. Leah watched me closely. You remember her, don't you? I couldn't speak. I just nodded slowly, the air suddenly too heavy. That was a long time ago, I managed. Where did you find this? In Mom's jewelry box, she said. She said it was the only picture she ever kept from before. Before. That word landed like a weight on my chest. I looked at the photo again, the background clearer now. The garden wasn't just any garden. It was the backyard of my childhood home. The brick wall, the ivy, the little bird bath, all of it came rushing back. I'd spent summers there chasing butterflies and pretending I could talk to robins. And Maria, she had been there too. Always there. Memories came in pieces, flickering images that didn't seem real until they hurt. Maria braiding my hair while humming softly. Maria kneeling beside me when I scraped my knee. Maria whispering, "You're safe now," during thunderstorms that used to send me running. She hadn't been a janitor then. She'd been my nanny. How old was your mom when that picture was taken? I asked, my voice unsteady. Leah shrugged. I think 21. She said she loved that job. She worked for my family. I murmured, almost to myself. But she never told me. Leah tilted her head. Maybe she wanted you to remember her without the sad part. I stared at the photo again. Something in it felt off now. Not wrong, but fragile, like a window into a time that didn't belong to me anymore. Did she ever tell you why she stopped working for us? Leah hesitated. She said, "People in big houses don't like hearing bad news." That answer sat in the pit of my stomach like lead. After Leah left that night, after I made sure she got home safely to her neighbor, I couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. It felt like a doorway to something I'd spent years pretending didn't exist. I poured myself a drink I didn't need, and sat in the dark, staring out at the city, waiting for courage. I called my mother. We hadn't spoken in weeks, not since she'd moved to the coast and left our old home behind. When she answered, her voice was clipped, impatient. "Isabel, it's midnight. What's wrong?" "Do you remember a woman named Maria Alvarez?" I asked. There was a pause, not the kind filled with confusion, but the kind weighted with recognition. "Why are you asking about her?" my mother said finally. "She worked for us when I was little." Another silence, then a soft sigh. "Yes, she did. For a few years." "What happened to her?" "I don't think this is something you need to revisit." Her tone, firm, rehearsed, made my pulse quicken. "Mother, she just died." I heard her inhale sharply. "Oh." A beat. "I'm sorry to hear that." "That's all you have to say?" I asked. "She practically raised me." "She was an employee, Isabel. An employee you let vanish from our lives without a word." There was a brittle sound on the other end, maybe a glass being set down too hard. "Your father made that decision, not me." "Why?" Her voice lowered, cautious now. "Because there was an incident. You don't remember?" I closed my eyes. "No." "What kind of incident?" "You were too young to understand. There was a misunderstanding. Your father thought she'd overstepped. It's better left in the past." "Overstepped how?" "She was emotional," my mother said quickly. "She said something inappropriate. It upset your father." "Upset him enough to fire her?" "She was lucky he didn't press charges." "Charges?" My voice rose despite myself. "For what?" "Isabel, please!" I cut her off. "She worked for us for years. She took care of me." "What did she do?" My mother's silence was answer enough. When she finally spoke, her voice was trembling slightly. "She accused your father of something, of behaving inappropriately toward her." The air left the room. My hand tightened around the glass until it cracked. "What?" "She was lying," my mother said quickly. "Your father was a good man, he wouldn't—" But I'd already stopped listening. My father, the man I had worshipped, whose name was on the side of my company's headquarters, who'd built our fortune with discipline and control, the man I had modeled my own life after, suddenly seemed like a stranger. I hung up without saying goodbye. The silence afterward was suffocating. The photograph still lay on my desk, Maria's smile now looking more like a secret she'd carried to her grave. The young woman who'd comforted a crying CEO years later had once been the same woman thrown out of my childhood home in disgrace. I tried to remember that day, any detail that might explain what had really happened, but all I could see was a little girl on the stairs, clutching her doll, listening to her father shouting behind a closed door. I had never known what it was about. Until now. I opened my laptop and accessed the digital archive of my family's company, the records my father had kept meticulously, down to the last payroll slip. I searched for her name. Maria Alvarez, termination date, April 17, 1993. I clicked the file. The scanned document loaded slowly, my heart pounding with every second. When it appeared, the text blurred before my eyes. I had to blink twice to see clearly. Her reason for dismissal was one line long: unprofessional conduct unbecoming of staff. And beneath that, in the lower right corner, was a signature I knew better than my own. Richard Hayes, my father. That night, I opened the old family records and found my father's signature on her termination letter. The next morning, I drove to a cemetery I didn't know existed, with a little girl in the back seat and flowers in her lap. The morning after I found my father's signature on that letter, the city felt different. The light seemed too sharp, the air too cold. I hadn't slept, not really, just sat by the window until dawn, staring at the photograph of Maria and me, tracing the lines of her younger face and wondering how I'd gone decades without seeing the truth. My father had ruined her life, and I had lived in the shadow of his choices, never questioning the comfort it bought me. When the sun finally rose, I called Leah. Her voice was small on the other end of the line, tired but steady. "You promised," she reminded me. "I remember," I said. "Get dressed, sweetheart. I'm coming to get you." The drive to Rosewood was quiet. My car, sleek, black, expensive, looked completely out of place among the narrow streets and old brick buildings. When Leah climbed in, she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers tied with a piece of blue ribbon. The flowers looked fragile, picked from some vacant lot, their stems uneven and petals already beginning to curl. "Are those for your mom?" I asked gently. She nodded. She liked flowers that looked like they tried hard to grow. I didn't know how to respond, so I just started the car. The directions the neighbor had given me led us toward the outskirts of the city, where the roads turned from asphalt to gravel, and the skyline disappeared behind rolling hills. My GPS had no data for the last few miles. I followed Leah's soft voice instead. "Left here," she'd say, or "That's the tree she liked." She sat quietly in the back seat, legs swinging, eyes fixed on the flowers. I caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, that same thoughtful stillness Maria used to have, the kind of quiet that felt like it came from carrying too much too young. After a while, she asked, "Do you think my mom's happy now?" The question caught me off guard. "I think she's at peace," I said carefully. "Is peace the same as happy?" Her words hit me harder than they should have. I glanced at her in the mirror, searching for the right answer. "Sometimes peace is what happy becomes when the world stops hurting you." She nodded slowly, as if filing that away for later. "Mom said heaven is just a place where tired people finally get to rest." I swallowed. She was right. We passed a small church surrounded by oak trees, its paint peeling, its bell long silent. Beyond it, a narrow dirt road led to a field dotted with white stones. The cemetery. There was no grand gate, no marble statues, just a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "St. Augustine's Rest." When I parked, Leah climbed out first, clutching her flowers. I followed her through the uneven rows of graves, the grass damp beneath our feet. The morning air smelled of soil and Rain. It was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way, the kind of beauty that asks for reverence, not recognition. Leah stopped halfway down the row and pointed. There. The headstone was simple, just a small gray slab with the name Maria Alvarez etched into it, along with 2 dates that felt too close together. Someone, probably the neighbor, had left a single candle beside it, burned down to its base. There were no fresh flowers. Leah knelt down and placed her bouquet on the grave, pressing the stems into the soft earth. Her hands were trembling slightly. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint rustle of wind through the trees. I stood there, staring at the name carved into stone, and realized that I'd never known her full story. Not really. She had been part of my childhood, part of my company, part of the world that shaped me. And yet, when she died, no one had thought to tell me. Not one person. The guilt rose slowly, like water filling a sinking ship. She used to say, Leah whispered, that people forget the ones who clean up their messes. I sank to my knees beside her. I never forgot her, I said quietly, though it wasn't true. I had, in all the ways that mattered. Leah looked at me with those wide, solemn eyes. Then why didn't you come before she died? The question cut deeper than any accusation. I didn't have an answer that would make sense to a child, or to anyone really, because I'd been busy, because I'd believed she was fine, because I hadn't thought someone like her could just disappear. I didn't know she was sick, I said finally. And that's my fault. I should have known. Leah nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully understand. Maybe she didn't need to. Her hand brushed over her mother's name, tracing each letter slowly. She told me you'd come, she said. My heart stopped. She said that? Yes. Leah's voice was soft, steady. She said one day, when she couldn't tell her story anymore, you'd find the pieces. Her words lingered in the air like a prophecy. I looked at the grave again. The stone was still clean, probably scrubbed by someone who couldn't afford marble or flowers, but cared enough to make sure it didn't fade. I ran my fingers over the engraved letters, my eyes stinging. I should have visited, I whispered. I should have told her I remembered. She knows, Leah said simply. I smiled faintly, though my throat tightened. Children have a way of believing the impossible because they haven't yet learned the world's cruelty. But part of me wanted to believe it too. That Maria somehow knew I was here. That she'd been waiting for this moment of acknowledgement. Leah stood and brushed off her skirt. Can I ask something? Of course. She hesitated, then said, If being kind makes people happy, why do most people stop being kind when they get rich? The air seemed too still. I looked at her. This little girl who'd lost everything and still found the courage to ask questions no adult ever dared to. Because, I said slowly, when people have too much, they start thinking kindness is something they can buy. And once you think that, you forget what it really means. She seemed to consider that, then nodded. That's sad. It is. We stood in silence for another few minutes. The sky had begun to gray, clouds gathering overhead. A soft drizzle started, not enough to send us running, just enough to make the earth smell more alive. Leah tilted her face upward and smiled faintly. She liked the rain, she said. Said it made her feel clean again. I closed my eyes. The rain on my skin felt like confession. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or stock prices. I was thinking about a woman who'd once braided my hair, who'd been wronged by the people I'd loved, who'd carried her pain quietly until it carried her away. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed something strange. Another bouquet, small and half hidden behind the gravestone. Roses, red and white, carefully wrapped. Who left those? I asked. Leah looked at me, confusion flickering across her face. I don't know. They weren't here yesterday. I stepped closer. There was a small envelope tucked beneath the ribbon, already damp from the rain. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Inside was a single line, written in neat, deliberate handwriting, one I recognized instantly. For forgiveness, from the one who never deserved it. And beneath it, signed simply, R.H. And when we reached the grave, my world, the one built on power, finally cracked. Her grave didn't even have a headstone, just a wooden marker with her name fading in the rain. The rain had turned steady now, not harsh, but constant, the kind that soaked through fabric and skin, the kind that demanded silence. It was the kind of rain that made the world feel like it was mourning with you. I stood beneath the heavy clouds, staring down at the patch of ground that held Maria Alvarez. There was no marble, no inscription carved into stone, only a narrow piece of weathered wood with her name written in fading black paint. The letters were already starting to blur, the M dissolving into the grain. Maria Alvarez. Nothing more. No dates, no words of love, no mention of who she had been. Just a name. The simplest thing a person could leave behind. Leah knelt beside the grave, her small hands gently straightening the flowers we'd brought the day before. The wild blooms looked fragile in the rain, their colors running into the dirt. She didn't complain about the wet ground or the chill. She just worked quietly, arranging each stem with the care of someone performing a sacred ritual. Watching her broke something open inside me. I thought there'd be a real headstone, I whispered, though the words were mostly for myself. She deserved more than this. Leah didn't look up. She said fancy graves are for people who need reminding. Mom said the people who love you already remember. Her voice was calm, steady, too wise for a child her age. I bit back the ache rising in my throat. She was right, I said softly. But still, this isn't enough. I crouched beside her, my knees sinking into the mud. The scent of earth filled the air, sharp, clean, and cruelly alive. The rain had washed away the dust from the wooden cross, revealing the faint carvings Maria must have made herself. Small scratches, almost invisible, unless you were close enough to see them. I traced them with my fingers. They weren't words. They were shapes, tiny stars, hearts, and what looked like a sun. Symbols of love carved into the last place she would ever rest. I felt my chest tighten. She hadn't carved them for herself. She'd carved them for Leah. And for a moment, all the titles, all the power, all the wealth I had built felt meaningless. I was just a woman kneeling beside the grave of someone I had failed. The rain blurred everything, the edges of the world, the boundaries between past and present. And then the memories came, uninvited. I saw her again. Not the janitor, not the woman bent over a mop in my building's corridors, but the Maria I had known as a child. The one who had braided my hair every morning before school. The one who used to pack my lunches with hand-cut fruit when my mother forgot. I remembered her laughter, soft and low, the kind that made you want to protect it. I remembered her voice saying, "Miss Isabel, always stand up straight. The world will try to make you small. Don't let it." And I remembered my father's voice, too. Hard, dismissive. "She's just help, Isabel. Don't get attached." The first time I heard him speak to her sharply, I was 8. I'd spilled orange juice on the carpet, and Maria had rushed to clean it. My father's anger was out of proportion, not at the stain, but at her. He told her she should have been more careful, that she was lucky to have a job in our house at all. Even then, I'd known something about his tone was wrong, but I hadn't said anything. I'd just stood there, clutching my doll, pretending I didn't see the way Maria's eyes dimmed. And now, years later, kneeling beside her unmarked grave, I realized that silence had been my first act of betrayal. "Did she ever talk about my family?" I asked quietly. Leah looked up at me, her dark hair stuck to her face in wet strands. "She said you were kind, that you didn't know." "Didn't know what?" "That your dad hurt her." The words hit me like a physical blow. I exhaled shakily. "She told you that?" Leah nodded, her fingers tracing the carvings on the wood. "She said he made her feel small, but she forgave him anyway." "Forgave him?" My voice broke. After everything? She said some people carry pain so deep they forget how to put it down, Leah murmured. She didn't want to carry it forever. The simplicity of her words tore through me. Children have a way of making truth sound like poetry, and that hurt more than any accusation could. I wanted to tell her everything, about the letter, about the photograph, about the fact that my father's cruelty had shaped both of our lives in ways I was only beginning to understand. But she was too young, too innocent to inherit that weight. So instead, I just said, "Your mother was the bravest person I've ever known." Leah smiled faintly. "She said you'd say that." My breath caught. "She said that?" Leah nodded. "She said one day you'd remember what she used to mean to you, that you'd come and see her, even if it was too late." Her small voice cracked slightly on the last words, and I felt something inside me crumble. "I am too late," I whispered. "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "She said you'd come too late, but that you'd still come." The rain grew heavier, drops striking the wooden marker like quiet applause from the heavens. I bowed my head, letting it wash over me, as if the storm could absolve me of everything I hadn't done. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, low, mournful, endless. I pressed my palm flat against the earth, feeling the cool, damp soil beneath my skin. The rain mixed with my tears until I couldn't tell which was which. In that moment, it didn't matter that I was a CEO or that my name sat on the side of skyscrapers. All the power I had could not buy back the chance to say thank you, to say sorry. I thought of my father again. His name still carved in marble back at the Hayes Tower. His portrait still hanging in the executive lobby, smiling the smile of a man who never paid for what he'd done. And then I thought of Maria, buried under a wooden cross that was already fading. The contrast made my stomach turn. One had monuments, the other had memories. Leah stood, brushing her muddy hands against her dress. "She'd want you to stop crying," she said gently. "She said tears are only for people who can't change what comes next." I managed a weak smile through the ache. "And what comes next?" Leah thought for a moment, her gaze lifting to the gray sky. "You remember her. And you make sure nobody ever forgets again." I nodded, swallowing hard. The words sounded like a promise, one I intended to keep. I looked at the wooden marker again, rain streaking down its face, and whispered, "I won't let you fade, Maria. Not again." Leah looked up at me and said, "Mom said you'd come too late, but that you'd still come. She'd written to me 3 times, and never mailed a single one." The sky had cleared by the time we got back to the city, but I carried the rain with me. It clung to my clothes, to my hair, to my thoughts. That wooden marker, the uneven letters of Maria's name, the little girl beside me who carried her mother's quiet strength. It all stayed lodged somewhere deep, where guilt and grace lived side by side. Leah sat quietly in the back seat again, hands folded in her lap, staring out the window. When we reached her building, she didn't get out right away. Instead, she unzipped her school bag and pulled out a white envelope. It was slightly creased, edges smudged with fingerprints. "She wanted you to have this," Leah said softly, holding it out. "She said to wait until after." I took it carefully, my breath catching at the familiar handwriting on the front. "For Miss Hayes, not Isabel, not Ms. Hayes. Miss, the way she'd called me when I was 6, when I still thought the world was kind and grown-ups were infallible." "Did she tell you what was inside?" I asked. Leah shook her head. "She just said you'd understand." I wanted to open it right there in the car, but something stopped me. A need for stillness, for ceremony. Letters like this weren't meant to be read between traffic lights and engine noise. They were meant to be opened when you could truly listen. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The city lights pressed against the windows, but inside it was quiet. I made tea I didn't drink, then finally slid a finger under the seal and unfolded the letter. The first page was dated 6 months earlier. The ink had bled slightly, as if it had been written with tears nearby. My dear Miss Hayes, if you are reading this, then I am already where pain can no longer reach me. Don't be sad for me. I lived a full life, maybe not in luxury, but in love, and that was enough. My throat tightened. Her handwriting was the same looping script I remembered from the notes she used to leave on the kitchen counter when I was little. Breakfast in the oven. Have a beautiful day, Miss Isabel. I never meant for you to find out about the past the way you did. Your father and I, our stories were never meant to cross again. He carried his guilt quietly. So did I. He wasn't a bad man, Isabel, just a proud one. Pride makes people cruel. I forgave him a long time ago. Not because he asked, but because holding on to hurt keeps you small, and I couldn't be small anymore. Not with Leah depending on me. The words blurred through the sting in my eyes. I read on. I left Hayes Industries without bitterness. I only hoped the little girl I once took care of would grow into the kind of woman who saw people for who they are, not what they do. When I saw you again all those years later, walking through the halls in your sharp suit, your father's eyes in your face, I was proud. You'd become everything I dreamed you would be, even if you didn't remember me. I set the letter down for a moment, pressing my palms against my eyes. My breath came in shallow waves. I had remembered her, in flashes, in warmth, in the sound of a lullaby I could never quite place. But I had buried her under ambition and legacy, under the armor I'd built to survive in my father's world. The next paragraph was shorter, shakier, the handwriting weaker. I didn't tell anyone about the illness. You would have sent doctors, treatments, help, and I couldn't risk it. I needed to make sure Leah would be okay when I was gone, and I didn't want pity to follow her through her life. I taught her how to be kind without being soft, strong without being cruel. Please make sure she doesn't forget that. I reached the final page, and my hands trembled as I turned it. Miss Hayes, you once told me, when you were small, that I made the world feel safe. I never forgot that. Even when the world stopped being kind to me, I carried that memory like a prayer. It reminded me that goodness can come full circle, that maybe one day you'd find your way back to it too. My vision blurred completely. I let the tears fall, hot and unashamed. I forgive you, Isabel. Not because you wronged me, but because life wronged both of us in different ways. You lost your mother's warmth to cold ambition, and I lost my dignity to someone else's pride. But we were both victims of the same man's silence. You can break that pattern now. You can choose to see the people he never saw. I felt the room tilt. My father's portrait still hung on the wall, framed in gold. I couldn't look at it. The words on the page burned through me. And then, at the bottom of the letter, a line written in darker ink, as if added later, trembling but deliberate. Take care of her. She's yours too. For a long moment, I just stared at the words. My heart pounded, the sound deafening in the silence. She's yours too. I read it again and again. The meaning struck in slow, painful waves. The photograph, Maria and a child. Me, the timeline, the secrecy. My father's guilt, her silence. It all began to connect. I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping against the marble floor. My breathing came shallow, uneven. No, I whispered to the empty room. That can't be. But it could. Maria hadn't written those words metaphorically, not out of sentiment, out of truth. She's yours too. Leah wasn't just her daughter. She was my father's daughter, which meant she was my sister. The letter trembled in my hands as the truth crashed over me. Every act of kindness, every gentle smile, every question Leah had asked now carried a weight I couldn't bear. She wasn't just the daughter of a woman I'd failed. She was the living echo of everything my father had hidden, everything I'd been blind to. I sank to the floor, the letter still clutched against my chest. I wanted to scream, to cry, to apologize to a woman who could no longer hear me. I wanted to tell her I understood now. that I would do what she asked, that I would take care of Leah, not out of guilt, but out of love. The city outside carried on, cars moving, people rushing, lights glowing, oblivious to the quiet earthquake happening in one apartment high above them. I looked down at the last line of her letter again, and this time I didn't see a confession. I saw a command and a promise. At the bottom of the letter, one line changed everything. Take care of her, she's yours too. Blood doesn't make a family, but sometimes it rewrites one. The letter lay on the table like a wound that wouldn't close. I must have read that last line 100 times, hoping the words would change, rearrange themselves into something less devastating, less final. But they didn't. Take care of her, she's yours too. I had spent my life building walls, glass ones, marble ones, emotional ones, all to keep my world perfectly divided, the strong and the weak, the powerful and the invisible. But with one sentence, Maria Alvarez had torn them all down. Leah wasn't just her daughter, she was my father's daughter, which meant she was my sister. The thought felt foreign in my mouth, like a word I'd never learned to pronounce. Sister. I looked around my penthouse, at the awards on the shelves, the city lights glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the framed portrait of my father smiling with the certainty of a man who'd never faced consequences. Everything in that room was built on his legacy, and now I saw the rot beneath the polish. Maria had carried his secret. I had inherited his guilt. For years, my father's name had been synonymous with excellence, power, philanthropy. Richard Hayes, the man who built empires and funded charities and lectured about ethics in boardrooms where no one dared challenge him. And Maria, she'd been his employee, his housekeeper, his scapegoat. And now I knew his victim too. The first emotion that hit me wasn't anger. It was nausea, a physical, twisting sickness that climbed from my stomach to my throat. Every memory I had of my childhood, the laughter at dinner, the way my father used to pat my head and say, "One day you'll run it all," blurred into something dark, something tainted. Because while I was learning to walk in silk shoes, another child, my sister, was learning to survive in silence. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the marble floor. The sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. I pressed my palms against the cool surface of the table, staring down at the letter again. My reflection stared back, not the confident CEO, not the woman who had it all under control, but a stranger wearing my face. How do you look at yourself knowing your comfort was someone else's suffering? I walked to the window, the city sprawling below me, glittering and indifferent. Somewhere down there, Leah was probably asleep, her little hand clutching that stuffed rabbit she never went anywhere without. She had no idea what she was to me now, or what I was to her, and I had no idea how to tell her. The next morning, I drove to the office early, hoping the work would drown the noise in my head. It didn't. Every hallway, every polished tile, every employee greeting me with, "Good morning, Miss Hayes," felt like an accusation. This building, Hayes Tower, was the crown jewel of my father's empire. But now I saw it for what it was, a monument built on silence. When I entered my office, I found my assistant, Claire, sorting through the day's paperwork. She smiled politely, but the look faltered when she saw my face. "Rough night?" she asked carefully. I almost laughed. Rough didn't begin to describe it. "Something like that," I said, sinking into my chair. Claire hesitated. "You don't look like yourself today." "I'm not," I murmured. She gave a sympathetic nod, then left me alone. The moment the door clicked shut, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I rarely touched. Inside were the oldest records of the company's founding, including documents my father had signed decades ago. I flipped through them with trembling hands until I found what I was looking for, the employment files from our old estate. There it was, Maria Alvarez, domestic staff. And just beneath her name, in neat handwriting, termination, personal conduct violation. I felt my stomach drop, personal conduct. That was my father's favorite phrase for anything he didn't want people to question. And there, in the notes section, was a single sentence that changed everything. Discretion required. Matter resolved privately. Resolved privately. He hadn't just fired her. He had erased her. The pen slipped from my hand. I sat back, breath shaking, staring at that cold, bureaucratic phrase, the lie that had rewritten both our lives. Maria hadn't been dismissed for some professional mistake. She had been silenced. I imagined the scene, my father sitting behind his oak desk, his voice calm, commanding, telling her to disappear for the good of everyone involved. Maybe he even offered her money. Maybe he said it was mercy. And she, desperate, humiliated, pregnant, must have taken it. The betrayal made my skin crawl. I remembered being a little girl, watching Maria leave that house for the last time. I'd been standing by the window, confused, clutching the stuffed bear she'd sewn for me. I'd asked my father where she was going. He'd said, "She made a mistake." And I'd believed him. Now, decades later, I finally understood. The mistake wasn't hers. It was his. And mine, for never asking. By afternoon, the noise in my head had turned unbearable. I canceled meetings, turned off my phone, and sat in the silence of my office. Every reflection of myself in the glass walls felt like a stranger's accusation. I thought about what Mariah had written, about forgiveness, about choosing to let go of pain. But how do you forgive a ghost? How do you forgive a man who's been dead for years but still manages to ruin lives from his grave? That evening, I went to see Leah. She was sitting on the apartment floor, drawing. The room smelled faintly of crayons and rain, familiar and small and heartbreakingly innocent. When she looked up, she smiled. "Hi, Miss Hayes." The title hit me differently now. I sat down beside her, trying to find my voice. "Leah," I said gently, "can I tell you something about your mom?" She nodded, setting down her drawing. "Your mother was the bravest woman I ever knew," I began. "She worked hard, loved deeply, and carried more than anyone should have to, and she kept a secret, not to hurt you, but to protect you." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. "She wanted you to have a better life," I continued, my voice trembling. "And now it's my turn to make sure you do." She tilted her head. "Because you were her boss?" I swallowed hard. "Because I'm your family." She blinked, processing, then frowned slightly. "Family?" "Yes." My voice broke. "Your mom wanted me to take care of you. She wanted you to know that you're not alone." Her small brow furrowed. "But why?" I hesitated, the truth heavy on my tongue. I couldn't tell her yet. Not this, not now. She was too young to understand what kind of man our father really was. "Because she loved you," I said finally. "And so do I." Leah studied me for a long moment, then reached out and took my hand. Small, warm, trusting. "Okay," she said softly. "Then I love you too." I bit back a sob, squeezing her hand gently. That night when I left her apartment, the city lights looked sharper than before, crueler almost. The truth had set me free, yes, but freedom comes with a price. I had inherited more than a company, more than a legacy. I had inherited the shame of the man who built it, and the responsibility to undo it. And as I walked out into the cold night, Maria's last words echoed in my mind like a prayer and a curse all at once. "Take care of her. She's yours too." I thought the truth had set me free, but it was just beginning to chain me. The next day, I stood before my company, and every lie we'd ever told was sitting in the front row. The boardroom had always been my battlefield, sleek, air-conditioned, and sterile. A place where power was currency and silence was compliance. I'd fought wars here, brokered deals worth millions, fired people with a calm tone and a steady pen. But that morning, as I walked into the glass-walled conference room, I wasn't there to protect the company. I was there to tear it open. Every seat was filled. Board members, executives, investors, journalists invited for what they thought was a quarterly address. Outside the windows, The city gleamed like a promise, the skyline sharp against the pale dawn. Inside, the air was thick, anticipation mixed with unease. They expected numbers, projections, profit reports. They didn't expect a confession. "Good morning," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "Before we begin, I'd like to share a story." A ripple of confusion moved across the room. People shifted in their chairs. I caught the look of my CFO, a man who valued spreadsheets over souls, frowning as if deviation from the agenda was an offense. I didn't care. "This company," I continued, "was founded on the principle of excellence. We tell ourselves that we value hard work, dedication, and integrity. But the truth is, we've only ever valued visibility, the kind that comes with suits and titles." Murmurs began to rise. I pressed on. 30 years ago, a woman worked for this company, not as an executive, not as a strategist, but as a janitor. Her name was Maria Alvarez. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. No one reacted at first. And then someone whispered something, the faint rustle of gossip rising. "She cleaned these halls long after everyone went home," I said. "She made this building shine while we slept in comfort. She smiled at people who never learned her name. And when she got sick, she kept showing up because she believed her work mattered, even if no one else did." I looked out over the faces in front of me, polished, well-fed, perfectly composed. And yet I saw no recognition. None of them remembered her. None of them had ever looked. "When Maria died," I said, my voice tightening, "there was no announcement, no acknowledgement, no condolences. We lost one of our own, and not a single person in this room noticed." The silence that followed was heavy, almost accusatory. I could see the discomfort spreading, the way guilt crept behind their expressions, but refused to settle long enough to grow roots. I paused, taking a breath. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the edges of the podium. "She wasn't just a janitor," I continued. "She was a mother, a fighter, a woman who once worked for my family long before she worked for this company. And while we were celebrating success, she was quietly holding everything together for people who didn't even remember her face." Someone near the end of the table, Davenport, one of the older board members, cleared his throat sharply. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice smooth but patronizing. "With all due respect, this doesn't seem appropriate for a business report." I met his gaze. "No, it doesn't. But it's appropriate for a reckoning." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You're making this personal." "It is personal," I said. "It should be personal. Every decision we make affects people like her. People who keep this place running while we pretend they don't exist." Another board member, younger but just as polished, spoke up. "We appreciate your sentiment, Isabel, but this isn't the time or place for emotional outbursts. The shareholders have had enough of my father's lies," I cut in sharply. The room went still. Every head turned. I let the words hang there, raw and heavy. "My father built this company, yes, but he also built it on silence, on power that thrived in the shadows. Maria Alvarez paid the price for his pride. And I'm done pretending we can build a future without acknowledging that past." Davenport's jaw tightened. "You're treading dangerous ground, Ms. Hayes. Our reputation." "Reputation is just the story we choose to tell about our sins," I said. "And I'm choosing to tell the truth." A few of the journalists in the back began typing furiously. Cameras clicked softly. I could feel the tide turning, not in my favor, but in honesty's. "I'm renaming the Community Outreach Division," I continued. "It will now be called the Alvarez Foundation. Its purpose will be to support the workers who keep this company alive. The janitors, assistants, drivers, cafeteria staff, the invisible pillars we've ignored for too long." The announcement drew a mix of gasps and scoffs. Davenport shook his head. "You're destroying everything your father built." "No," I said. "I'm finally cleaning up after it." The irony in my words wasn't lost on anyone. The silence that followed was sharp, edged with disbelief and judgment. But beneath it, something else stirred. The faint hum of conscience. the sound of truth making itself known. I looked around the room one last time. If any of you think this company can survive another generation by pretending people like Maria didn't matter, I said, then by all means, vote me out. But know this, you'll be proving her right. You'll be proving that nothing changes, that kindness doesn't belong in boardrooms. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands cold but steady. But if you believe, even for a moment, that we can be better, then stay. Because I won't lead another day pretending the people who clean our floors are beneath the people who walk on them. The words hung in the air like smoke. Some faces looked away, some hardened, a few softened. And then, just as I was about to close my speech, I saw it. Movement at the back of the room. The doors opened quietly. A small figure stepped inside, clutching a handful of wildflowers, their stems wrapped in twine. Leah. Her dark hair framed her face, her eyes wide but steady. She walked slowly down the aisle between rows of executives in tailored suits, her shoes leaving faint wet prints on the polished floor. Gasps rippled through the room as she approached the podium. Her presence was a fracture in the illusion. Innocence walking through power's polished facade. She stopped beside me, her tiny hand clutching the bouquet. Without a word, she placed it on the table in front of me. A simple offering of color and truth amid the gray marble. Sometimes redemption doesn't knock, it just walks in holding flowers. The morning after the board meeting felt strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, not peace exactly, but the stillness of a world trying to remember how to breathe again. News of my speech had spread through the company overnight. Some called it brave, others called it reckless, a few called it career suicide. But for the first time in years, I didn't care about the headlines, or the shareholders, or the carefully crafted image of Isabel Hayes, CEO, because I had finally told the truth. Still, as I stood in the glass-walled lobby of Hayes Tower, watching employees trickle in, I couldn't shake the unease in my chest. The marble floors gleamed. The massive silver logo behind the reception desk reflected the morning light. Everything looked perfect. But it all felt different now. People glanced at me with a mixture of curiosity and caution, as if I'd suddenly become unpredictable, volatile. Maybe I had. But beneath that, I sensed something else. Respect. I had come down early to oversee a small installation, a framed black and white photo of Maria Alvarez. It was simple, her standing in her janitor's uniform, smiling faintly, a mop handle in one hand and quiet pride in her eyes. I had chosen the photo myself. It was one the HR department had nearly deleted during an old system purge. Now it would hang in the lobby, permanently. The maintenance staff watched quietly as the frame was mounted on the wall beside the company's founders' portraits. The contrast was jarring. Suits, awards, power, and then Maria, humble, dignified, real. I stood there staring at it, the weight of a lifetime pressing down on me. "You should have been here all along," I whispered. "Excuse me," a small voice said behind me. I turned. There she was. Leah. She was standing by the security desk, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind her mother used to bring. Her school bag hung from one shoulder, her hair slightly messy, her shoes damp from the rain outside. The receptionist looked uncertain, but Leah smiled shyly and said, "I'm here to see Miss Isabel." Something in me broke and mended at the same time. I walked over slowly, my heels clicking against the marble, and crouched down until we were eye level. "You came all this way?" She nodded. "I wanted to bring you flowers, like Mom used to." Her small fingers extended the bouquet toward me. Imperfect, colorful, tied together with a bit of string. I took it gently, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said softly. "They're beautiful." Leah smiled, the kind of pure, unfiltered smile that children give before the world teaches them to hide it. Around us, employees had begun to pause. Secretaries, executives, custodians, watching silently. For once, they didn't see a CEO and a janitor's child. They saw something human. "Do you work here?" Leah asked innocently, looking around the lobby. I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. "Yes," I said. "For now, I do." She tilted her head. "Do you like it?" Her question was simple, but it hit me harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. Did I like it? This building? This life? This constant battle to prove worth to men who never cared? "I think," I said carefully. "I'm learning to." Her eyes flicked toward the photo on the wall. "That's Mommy," she said softly, stepping closer. "Yes," I whispered. "That's her." Leah traced her fingers along the edge of the frame. "She'd like that people can see her now." I felt tears sting behind my eyes. She should have always been seen. At that moment, something shifted in the room. One of the janitors, a quiet man in his 50s who'd worked here for decades, took off his cap and nodded at the photo. Then another employee stepped forward, placing a single white lily beside Leah's bouquet. One by one, others followed, assistants, secretaries, even a few executives. No one spoke, but the gesture said enough. It was as if the building itself had finally exhaled. I turned back to Leah. "Would you like to help me do something?" She nodded eagerly. I took her hand and led her toward the reception desk. "From now on," I told the receptionist, "this bouquet stays right here in front of Maria's photo. Fresh flowers every week." The woman nodded, visibly moved. Leah squeezed my hand. "Can I bring them sometimes?" I smiled. "You can bring them anytime." She looked up at me then, serious and wise beyond her years. "Mom said you'd understand one day." I swallowed hard. She was right. We stood there for a long moment, me in my tailored suit, her in her rain-speckled school dress, two halves of a story finally meeting in the middle. Around us, people moved slower, quieter, as if afraid to break the fragile grace of that moment. Finally, Leah tugged my sleeve. "I have to go to school," she said reluctantly. "I'll drive you," I offered. Her face brightened. "Really?" "Really." We walked out together side by side, through the glass doors that once symbolized distance. The guards held them open, smiling faintly. Outside, the city hummed. Cars, voices. Life. But for once, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt alive. As we reached the car, Leah climbed in, carefully holding the empty bouquet wrapper on her lap. "Do you think Mom can see the flowers?" she asked. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, meeting her gaze. "I think she can see everything now." Leah smiled softly and looked out the window as we pulled away. The rain had stopped, but the world still shimmered, as if it, too, had been washed clean. That night I came back to the building after hours. The lobby lights glowed faintly. The air was still. Maria's photograph hung there, surrounded by flowers left by strangers who finally knew her name. I stood there alone, staring at her face. The quiet strength, the gentleness I had once mistaken for weakness. For years, I'd believed that redemption came from grand gestures, apologies, speeches, change written into policy. But standing there, I realized something simpler, something truer. It wasn't me saving Leah. It wasn't even me saving Maria's memory. It was them, Maria, Leah, their unshakable kindness, who had saved me. For the first time in decades, I knelt on the same marble floor where Maria once scrubbed, bowed my head, and whispered, "Thank you." That night, I realized I hadn't been saving her. She'd been saving me. I'd spent my life building empires. She'd built a home out of nothing. The road to San Paloma twisted through the mountains like a ribbon of dust and memory. It was the kind of place my father would have called nowhere, a small village tucked beneath the hills, where life moved slower, and people measured wealth not in money, but in kindness. Maria Alvarez had grown up here. Her final wish, written in that trembling handwriting I'd memorized, was simple. If you can, help them build a school. Let children laugh where I once did. So here I was, the CEO who had once cared only for balance sheets, driving a rented pickup full of supplies, with a 10-year-old girl in the passenger seat holding a basket of wildflowers. Leah hummed quietly, her feet swinging above the floor mat. She was growing fast, her features softening into something that mirrored both Maria's warmth and my father's steel. She didn't know the full truth yet, not everything about the man who connected us. But one day, she would. For now, she just knew she had family. When we arrived, the village greeted us not with ceremony but with open arms. Women carried baskets of bread, men offered tools, and children peeked shyly from behind doorways. They knew who Maria had been, not the janitor, not the forgotten worker, but the girl who'd left home with nothing, and built a life with quiet dignity. The lot where the new school would stand was nothing more than a patch of dry earth overlooking the river. The air smelled of clay and eucalyptus. I stepped out, feeling the dust cling to my shoes. Shoes far too expensive for this place. Leah ran ahead, her laughter echoing against the hills. "She used to sit right there," said an elderly woman beside me, pointing to a small stone bench beneath an olive tree. "Maria would help the younger children with their lessons when she was only 12. Said she wanted to be a teacher one day." I smiled faintly. And she was, in her own way. We spent the day helping lay the foundation. My hands, unaccustomed to work that didn't involve signatures and screens, ached from shoveling. But there was something grounding about it, something real. Every handful of dirt felt like a confession, every brick like a prayer. At one point, Leah knelt beside me, dipping her fingers into wet cement. "Can I write something?" she asked. "Of course." In careful letters, she wrote, "For Mom, who made everything beautiful." When the sun began to set, painting the sky gold and crimson, we sat on the stone bench, watching the villagers clean up. The laughter carried across the air, light, free, the kind of sound Maria would have loved. I turned to Leah. "You know, your mom built this long before we did." She looked confused. "How?" "By loving people enough that they wanted to build something for her," I said quietly. "That's what legacy really means." Leah rested her head on my shoulder. "I think she'd like it here. I think she never really left." Later that evening, we stayed in a small house at the edge of the village, one that Maria's childhood friend had offered us. The walls were made of stone and painted pale yellow. There was no luxury here, but there was peace. The kind of peace that money couldn't buy. Leah unpacked her bag, pulling out paints and brushes. "Can I paint something for the school?" "Of course," I said, smiling. She spread paper across the old wooden table and began to paint with deliberate strokes. A bright blue sky, children holding hands beneath a tree, and in the corner, a woman watching over them with kind eyes. "That's her, isn't it?" I asked. Leah nodded. "She's smiling because we finally finished her homework." I laughed softly, a sound that felt unfamiliar and welcome all at once. When she was done, she pushed the painting toward me. "Now you," she said. "You paint something too." I hesitated. "I don't think I remember how." "Everyone remembers," she said firmly. "You just have to start." So I did. Slowly, awkwardly, I painted a small yellow house with an open door. No walls, no gates, just light pouring out. Leah studied it and smiled. "It looks like a home." "That's what she made for us," I said, "even when we didn't know it." Before bed, Leah knelt beside the window, her hands clasped together. "Are you praying?" I asked softly. She nodded. "Mom used to do this every night. She said even if no one's listening, it helps your heart remember to be kind." I sat beside her, uncertain, awkward. I hadn't prayed in decades, not since I'd learned that the world didn't reward goodness, it rewarded power. But tonight, in that tiny house with its flickering candlelight and the sound of crickets outside, power felt meaningless. Leah took my hand. "You can just say thank you," she whispered. So I did. Not to anyone in particular, just to the memory of a woman who had cleaned my father's halls and healed my heart from beyond the grave. The next morning, the villagers gathered again, laughter and chatter filling the air. The first wall of the school went up, sturdy and bright. I watched Leah run between the workers, her hands covered in dust, her smile radiant. Someone handed me a small plaque engraved with Maria's name, the Maria Alvarez School, built with love, laughter, and courage. I traced the letters with my fingertips, my throat tightening. As we prepared to leave, Leah slipped her hand into mine. She looked back at the school, the bricks glinting in the sunlight, the air alive with the sounds of children playing. "Mom would be proud," she said softly. "She always said laughter sounds better when it's shared." I looked down at her, smiling through tears. She was right. And as we walked down the hill together, I realized Maria hadn't just built a house or a legacy. She had built a bridge. One that connected everything I used to be with everything I still hoped to become. As we left, Leah whispered, "Mom would be proud. She always said laughter sounds better when it's shared." Every year, we bring 2 bouquets, one for her grave and one for the girl who taught me how to live. The Montana spring came soft and early that year, brushing the fields with color as if the earth itself wanted to start over. The morning air was crisp, filled with the smell of new grass and rain. I drove slowly down the dirt road that led to the small cemetery at the edge of town, the car's tires crunching against gravel. Leah sat beside me, holding 2 bouquets in her lap, one made of delicate lilies and white roses, the other of wildflowers she'd picked herself. The lilies were for Maria. The wildflowers were for us. It had been 6 months since we'd opened the school in San Paloma. The walls now echoed with laughter, chalk dust, and promise, everything Maria had dreamed of. Every week, Leah sent drawings to the children there, and they'd write back with notes and handmade cards. The school had become more than a building. It was living proof that love could outlast loss. As we approached the cemetery, Leah hummed softly, the same tune Maria used to sing while cleaning the halls, a melody I'd once ignored behind my office door. Now, it sounded like peace. The wooden marker had long been replaced with a marble headstone that read, "Maria Alvarez, beloved mother, kind soul, and teacher of hearts." The ground around it was dotted with blooms, planted by visitors who'd heard her story. She had become something rare, a quiet legend, not because she was powerful, but because she was good. I knelt beside the grave, smoothing the edges of the grass with my palm. "Hello, Maria," I whispered. "We brought you company." Leah knelt too, placing the lilies carefully before the headstone. Her hair, now longer, caught the sunlight as she brushed a stray leaf away. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "We finished the art room at school. Miss Isabel helped me paint the walls. They're yellow. Your favorite." I smiled, remembering the smell of the paint, the way Leah had laughed when she accidentally left a yellow handprint on my sleeve. Maria's resting place overlooked the hills. From here, you could see the horizon stretch wide and endless. I often wondered if she'd chosen this spot herself, a place where the sky never stopped growing. Leah sat cross-legged beside me, her fingers tracing the engraved letters. "Do you think she can see us?" she asked. "I think she's been watching all along," I said. "Every time you laugh, every time you help someone, that's her. That's how she stays." Leah thought for a moment, then nodded. Then she must be happy. We sat in silence. The good kind. The kind that doesn't ache anymore. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers from the nearby fields, mixing with the faint perfume of lilies. 6 months had changed everything. I had stepped down as CEO, handing the company to a new generation who believed in people more than profits. The Alvarez Foundation had grown beyond what I imagined, offering scholarships, healthcare, and opportunities for workers once overlooked. But my greatest accomplishment wasn't written in press releases or business journals. It was sitting right beside me, humming to the breeze. a child who carried the best of two worlds in her heart. Leah tugged my sleeve gently. "Do you ever miss her?" "Every day," I said. "But missing her doesn't hurt the way it used to. It reminds me that I loved her, even if I realized it too late." She nodded solemnly, then smiled. "Mom said you used to be sad a lot." I laughed softly. She was right. "Are you happy now?" I looked at her, at those wide, knowing eyes that saw far more than her years. "Yes," I said. "Because of you." Her hand found mine, small but certain. "We can be happy for both of us now." We stayed there until the sun climbed higher, painting the sky gold. The flowers swayed in the wind like a quiet conversation between the living and the gone. Before leaving, Leah stood and took the second bouquet, the one she'd made herself, and placed it beside the lilies. "This one's for you," she said, glancing up at me. "For me?" I asked, startled. She nodded. "You helped Mom finish her story." I felt the breath catch in my chest. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "She helped me start mine." We walked back toward the car, the gravel crunching underfoot. I looked back once more at the grave, at the flowers standing side by side, elegant lilies and wild, imperfect blooms. Maria would have liked that, the balance of grace and freedom. As we reached the car, Leah slipped her hand into mine again. "Can we come next year too?" "Every year," I promised. She smiled, satisfied, then climbed into the passenger seat. As I started the engine, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror, sunlight catching her eyes, the faintest shadow of Maria's expression in her smile. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel haunted by the past. I felt rooted in it, like a seed finally planted in the right soil. The road home wound through the fields, golden under the afternoon light. Leah rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through her hair. She started laughing, bright, unrestrained laughter that filled the car, spilling into the world beyond. It was the same sound Maria used to make when she thought no one was listening. I joined her, laughing too, and for a moment I could almost feel Maria there with us, not as a ghost or a memory, but as something alive in the air between us. Every year we brought 2 bouquets. One for the woman who taught me what love looks like in its quietest form, and one for the child who taught me how to live it. The flowers never lasted long. The wind always carried their petals away, but that felt right somehow. Because love, like laughter, was never meant to stay trapped. It was meant to bloom, to fade, to return again in 1,000 different ways. And as we drove away from the hill where Maria rested, I looked at the horizon, endless and forgiving, and realized she was never truly gone. She just bloomed where guilt used to grow. As we left, I realized Maria was never gone. She just bloomed where guilt used to grow. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Tell me in the comments, what did Maria's forgiveness mean to you? Tap like if you believe kindness outlives power. Subscribe for more stories that remind you that love, loss, and second chances still matter. And share this video. Maybe someone you love needs to hear it today.